The town car rolled to a stop beneath the stone arch of Rosedale House, the Moore family's century-old mansion tucked into a quiet, tree-lined street in Toronto. It was just after dusk. The city lights below the ravine were blinking awake one by one, and the sky held that last violet ribbon of evening. Alexander Moore stepped out into the winter air, breath misting, a leather weekender slung over one shoulder. After 10 days of meetings in London, he had planned a soft rival hug his kids, kiss his wife, shower, sleep. He didn't plan for the sound that stopped him on the threshold. It was so thin at first he thought it was the wind pressing through the stonework, but the second time, there was no mistaking it. A stifled sob, small enough to hide under a table, raw enough to compare with any sound Alexander had ever heard in a boardroom or on a trading floor. He froze, hand on the brass handle of the oak door, and the old wood gave under his palm with a slow, groaning welcome. Inside, everything shone the checkerboard marble, the chandelier scattering crystal light, the gallery of family photos curated by interior designers from Yorkville. Warm air carried a scent of beeswax and something floral. The silence felt staged, like a hotel lobby after hours. He set his bag on the console table and listened. Another gasp, then a whisper, barely more than air. Please, please don't hurt us anymore. Alexander's stomach turned to stone. The voice came from deeper in the hall, toward the kitchen and the back stair. He crossed the foyer in long strides, shoes thudding against marble that suddenly felt indecently loud. At the archway to the kitchen he stopped. The lights were off. A dull glow from the stove clock threw a faint green smear across steel and granite. He almost called for Isabella, his wife of 18 months, but something, instinct or guilt, or both, clamped his throat shut. He flicked the under-cabinet lights. The room jumped into clarity, and there, in the doorway to the mudroom, stood Lily. His daughter's pink dress, the one with tiny embroidered birds she loved, was stained and torn at the hem. Her knee socks sagged unevenly. She clutched Noah, 8 months old, so close that his cheek was pressed flat against her shoulder. The baby's breath hitched in quick, hiccuping bursts. Lily's eyes were huge to bright, to wet, and her voice broke as she tried to be brave and failed completely. Daddy, don't let her. Her words died in a tiny gulp. She tried again. Please don't hurt me and my brother anymore. If a building can tilt without moving. Rosedale House tilted. Alexander's balance went. In the most expensive suit he owned, with a watch that could pay a nurse's salary for a year, he felt ridiculous and helpless, and very suddenly, very awake. Hey, he said, and even to himself he sounded like a stranger. Hey, it's me. He moved slowly, hands out like approaching a wounded bird. You're safe. Come here. Lily tightened her hold on Noah. The baby gave a wavering cry. Up close, Alexander saw a smear of dried milk on Noah's chin, a sour smell that didn't belong to formula so much as to neglect. He saw, too, the raw pink crescent at Lily's wrist, the kind of mark you get when something small but merciless squeezes. Can I hold him? Alexander asked. He'd built a company with 1,000 employees and negotiated with banks that behaved like kingdoms. But the question shook as it left his mouth. Lily glanced over his shoulder, toward the staircase that rose from the back hall. The look wasn't random. It was a check, the half-second reflex of prey animals at the edge of a field. Only then did she give the tiniest nod. Alexander slid Noah into his arms, surprised by how awkward the motion felt. The boy was heavier than he remembered, his body hot through the thin blanket. Alexander rocked him a little, the way Sophia got. Sophia had once taught him in a kitchen full of light and summer peaches, years before the hospital rooms and the quiet funeral, and the way a house can go on breathing without a mother. SHH. Buddy, he whispered, the old rhythm finding him. Dad's here. Noah's crying softened from knife edge to dull ache. Lily's shoulders sank a fraction. He put his free hand on her head, palm covering crown, and felt how small she was. A click sounded from above, soft, crisp, unmistakable. The small mechanics of a latch. Alexander's eyes went to the staircase. He didn't see anyone. He didn't need to. The fine hairs along his forearms stood. Alex? The voice rang down like warm syrup, practiced and pleasant. Isabella appeared at the landing, a navy silk blouse tucked neatly into tailored trousers. hair swept into a glossy knot. She took the stairs with the grace of someone who'd learned how to make an entrance. "I didn't hear you comin'. Why didn't you text? We'd have had dinner waiting." Her gaze slid to Noah in Alexander's arms, then to Lily's face. For a fraction of a heartbeat, one sharp, needle-thin instant, something flashed behind the gentleness. Not anger, not exactly, calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by a smile the color of afternoon tea. "Sweetheart," she cooed, "you should have told me you were hungry." She reached the bottom step and touched Lily's shoulder. The touch looked light. Lily flinched like it burned. Alexander's spine stiffened. "She's fine," he said, too quickly. He felt the sentence land between them like a card placed carefully in a high-stakes game. Isabella's hand floated back, fingers curved in a gesture of surrender. "Of course." She leaned in to press a kiss across Noah's temple, slowed an extra beat when she caught the sour milk, and smoothed the blanket. "He needs a fresh bottle. And you," she straightened, eyes sparkling at Alexander, "you need a shower and a decent meal. Travel always drains you. Come upstairs, change, then we'll all eat together. I made osso buco," a detail from the Florno. From Lily snagged him, a single trembling breath that whistled through clenched teeth. The sound of a child holding back a sob for fear that sound itself is dangerous. Alexander met Isabella's eyes and found nowhere to stand. Politeness would be easy. Habit would be easier. Neither felt possible. "I'll take them into the family room for a minute," he said evenly. "Then we'll eat." "Of course," Isabella said again, the picture of accommodation. She turned to the counter, humming, reaching for a pan with the casualness of a woman who belonged in this kitchen. So completely, the kitchen might obey her. "Mrs. Thompson will be back from the market any minute. I'll heat the sauce." Lily slipped her small hand into Alexander's coat and let him guide her toward the family room. The dark paneled walls swallowed the light into a steady amber. A fire, laid ready but unlit, waited in the grate. Alexander sat with Noah on the leather sofa and patted the cushion beside him. Lily perched on the edge as if the seat might eject her. She kept her eyes on the archway. "Who hurt you?" Alexander asked quietly. She swallowed. Her lips shaped a word that never made it past her teeth. The silence throbbed. He didn't press. Not yet. He counted Noah's breaths. He counted the seconds between the little tremors in Lily's shoulders. He counted the way his life had measured itself these last months in mergers and mile markers, instead of school pickups and bedtime stories. A man can be powerful in one building and powerless 10 kilometers north, where the rooms know his name but not what it means. From the kitchen came the light music of plates being set, not clatter, not noise, but choreography. Isabella talking to someone on speaker, voice lowered to a confidential hush, a laugh like a bell. The home had never looked better. All that gloss concealed something raw. A new sound slid in under the others, a dry, deliberate scrape, like a bolt eased across a strike plate. Alexander's breath hitched. He rose and crossed the hall in 3 steps, light on his feet for a man of his size, and looked up the back staircase. Nothing, only framed landscapes, lamps, silence. He put his hand on the newel post and felt stain over oak, money over history. His fingers closed until the knuckles blanched. "Alex?" Isabella called again, cheerful. "Table in 5. He looked back at his children, Noah's lashes damp against cheeks gone calm in sleep. Lily's face angled toward him, with an expression he couldn't decode, a map of fear and astonishment, and a question he wasn't sure he deserved to answer. "It's okay," he said, "because you start where you can." "I'm here." Lily's mouth moved, a breath, a whisper he had to lean in to catch. "Will you stay?" This time, the question lodged like a thorn and like a key, both at once. He swallowed, felt the old reflex, the calendar, the flight, the meeting rise up to provide cover, then wither against the sight before him. He tucked Noah closer, reached for Lily's hand, and squeezed. "Tonight," he said, "and tomorrow, as long as it takes." From the kitchen, a glass touched a counter a little too hard. Then, in the stairwell, to no one and to everyone, the faintest voice. "Sugar over steel, remember what we talked about." Not a sound. The house didn't tilt this time. It focused, and Alexander more understood that whatever had been happening inside Rosedale House had started long before he opened the door. Tonight, and that it would end only if he ended. The snow outside the bay windows muted the city into silence. In the dining room of Rosedale House, crystal goblets and silver cutlery glittered as though nothing in the world could disturb this tableau of wealth. Yet Alexander's mind still rang with his daughter's whisper, the tremor in her voice as she asked him to stay. He sat at the head of the table, Noah cradled awkwardly in one arm, Lily seated stiff and upright across from him. To his right, Isabella, his wife, his supposed partner. His second chance after grief glowed in the light of the chandelier. She poured him a glass of wine with the poise of a hostess trained for royal company. "Eat, sweetheart, so you'll grow strong," Isabella said gently, sliding a piece of veal onto Lily's plate. Her tone was sugar, but her hand pressed down on the girl's shoulder just a beat too long. Alexander saw Lily's small body flinch, the spoon in her hand tremble. He swallowed, forcing calm. For months he had ignored moments like these, telling himself Lily was adjusting to a new maternal figure, convincing himself Isabella's strictness was discipline, not cruelty. Tonight, though, with his son's warm weight on his arm and Sarah's letter burning in his pocket upstairs, he saw the signs with fresh eyes. "Daddy," Lily whispered suddenly, her eyes darting toward Isabella as though asking silent permission. "May I?" She stopped mid-sentence, cheeks paling, lips pressed tight. "Of course," Alexander cut in, his voice steadier than he felt. "You could always speak to me." Isabella's laugh spilled across the table, light and musical, designed to erase tension. "Children, darling, they freeze when they want to ask for dessert." She leaned toward Alexander, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. "Don't read too much into their little pauses." But her eyes, oh, her eyes. When Lily lowered her head again, Isabella's glance flicked sharp as a blade, a silent command that sliced deeper than any spoken threat. Alexander's breath caught, his anger tangled with shame. How long had he left them under this roof unprotected, while he buried himself in contracts and boardrooms? Later, when Isabella carried Noah upstairs with a practiced sway, Alexander lingered with Lily in the family room. The fire glowed low, casting shadows across the old portraits of his ancestors. He crouched to Lily's level, searching her face. "Has someone hurt you?" he asked softly. Her eyes widened, then darted again toward the hall. She shook her head too quickly, the denial too sharp to be true. He reached for her hand, but she pulled her sleeve down in one swift motion, hiding her wrist. That night, Alexander lay awake in the master bedroom beside Isabella, listening to her even breaths as though nothing could trouble her conscience. But in his mind, images of Lily's trembling shoulders replayed without mercy. He remembered Sarah, his first wife, her meticulous care, the way she had whispered on her hospital bed, "Promise me, Alex, protect them, no matter what." The promise he thought he had kept by remarrying, by providing a home, by building walls high and strong around them. But walls meant nothing when the enemy slept inside. At a.m. He slipped from the bed and walked the hallway. The children's door was closed, locked from the outside, a lock that shouldn't have been there. His chest constricted. He traced the metal with his fingertips, then forced himself to step away before waking them in panic. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of lemon polish. On the counter lay a folded towel Isabella had left earlier, placed deliberately across the banister rail. At the time, he thought it a domestic touch. Now he saw it as something else, an unspoken message to someone. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, the Rolex heavy on his wrist, feeling not like a titan of finance, but like a man on trial in his own home. The silence pressed, demanding answers. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked. Isabella, perhaps, or maybe just the settling of an old house. Either way, Alexander understood one thing with a clarity sharper than any balance sheet. The perfect wife he thought he'd married wore a mask, and behind it was someone he no longer recognized. The next evening, the dining room of Rosedale House played host to its usual theater of appearances. The mahogany table gleamed, candles flickered, and Isabella's voice danced through the air with syrupy warmth. To any visitor, the family would have looked perfect: father, mother, children seated neatly in their places. But Alexander could see beneath the polish now, and every detail that once seemed domestic comfort curdled into evidence. He watched Lily push a small pile of mashed potatoes across her plate with the edge of her fork. Her eyes stayed downcast, lashes trembling against pale skin. Beside her, Isabella leaned in close, brushing a strand of Lily's hair behind her ear with a gesture meant to look tender. But her fingers pressed firmly against the girl's temple, leaving her flinch visible to anyone who truly looked. "Eat, darling," Isabella whispered, just loud enough for Alexander to hear. "We want you strong, don't we?" Lily's small nod was mechanical. Alexander's chest tightened. He noticed the subtle wince when Isabella's hand left her, as if even the absence of touch carried threat. Noah whimpered in his high chair, and Isabella clucked sweetly, placing a spoon to his lips with practiced charm. Alexander forced a smile, but behind his teeth a storm brewed. After dinner, Isabella excused herself to take a call. The children retreated upstairs under Alexander's watch, their footsteps light, careful. He lingered near the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. Though thirst was the last thing he felt, that was when he heard it. From the shadowed corner beyond the pantry door came Isabella's voice, lower now, stripped of its sugary veil. "If you breathe a word to your father," she hissed, "I'll throw you and your brother out into the cold. Do you understand me, Lily?" A pause, then Lily's muffled sob. "Good girl. Remember that." The scrape of a chair, the click of a cabinet. Then silence. Alexander froze, every muscle locked. The water glass in his hand trembled. The rage that surged through him was so sharp it made his teeth ache. But he couldn't move, couldn't storm, couldn't shout, not yet. The children needed safety, not a scene that would leave them trembling even more. He stepped back quietly, retreating toward the family room. There he sank into the leather armchair, palms pressed to his temples. He felt guilt gnaw at him like acid. For months he had buried himself in boardrooms and airports, convincing himself he was providing. All the while, in this very house, his daughter had been living in fear. When Isabella emerged a moment later, her smile was flawless once again. "The market's doing terribly in Europe," she said lightly, slipping her phone into her pocket. "But we'll be fine, of course. Sit, Alex, relax. You've been working too hard." Her hand brushed his shoulder as she passed, gentle, possessive. He didn't move, didn't answer. He only listened to the echo of Lily's whisper in his head, "Please don't hurt us anymore." That night, long after Isabella drifted into her elegant, measured sleep, Alexander sat in the dim light of his study. The shelves around him were lined with law books, economic analyses, trophies of intellect and ambition. None of them offered an answer. He remembered Sarah again, his first wife, her meticulous way of folding Lily's clothes, her insistence that bedtime stories were never to be skipped, her voice quiet but firm. "Children remember everything. Alex, even what you think they won't." The memory was a knife, and a compass. At 2 in the morning, Alexander stood in the hallway outside his children's room. He touched the door handle and felt the resistance of the lock on the outside. His jaw clenched so tight he tasted iron. He wanted to tear it off the hinges, but the children's sleep was too fragile. So instead he laid his hand against the wood, whispering, "I'm here." From within came the faintest shift, the sound of small bodies stirring. Then quiet again. Alexander turned away, his decision heavy but certain. He could no longer pretend. The mask Isabella wore had slipped enough to reveal the truth, and now he would peel it away entirely. But for that, he needed proof. He needed allies. And most of all, he needed courage he hadn't known was still in him. The next morning, Toronto was buried under a heavy snowfall. White pressed against every window of Rosedale House, muffling sound, erasing edges, as if the mansion itself were suspended in a snow globe. Inside, however, Alexander's thoughts refused stillness. He had slept little, only dozed, half listening for every creak of the floorboards, every sigh that came from the children's room. By sunrise, he'd made a decision. He needed to look backward, not just forward. The answers were somewhere in the spaces of the house he had long avoided. He climbed the east staircase to the wing that had once belonged to Sophia, his late wife. Her room had been closed since her funeral. Isabella had urged it, saying, "We must live in the present, darling." The past only haunts. Alexander had obeyed, perhaps because grief made obedience easier than confrontation. Now, he turned the brass knob and pushed the door open. Dust motes swirled in the thin light. The air smelled faintly of lavender, as if Sophia's perfume still clung to the curtains. On the dresser sat a jewelry box untouched, beside it the silver-framed photo of Lily as a toddler. Alexander's throat tightened. He pulled open the wardrobe doors. Dresses hung neatly, preserved like relics. Beneath them, in a small drawer, he found a stack of envelopes. One slid free, its edge catching against the wood. The handwriting on the front stopped him cold. He would have known it anywhere. To Alexander. A vow. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened it with careful fingers. Sophia's words, written in her neat, looping script, spilled out. If you are reading this, I fear the children may one day need you in a way you do not expect. Please, Alex, be present. Protect them, no matter the cost. Our home is not safe if their voices are silenced. His chest constricted. The letter felt prophetic, as though Sophia had foreseen a future shadow. He closed his eyes, pressing the paper to his chest, whispering a vow he had failed once, but would not fail again. A sound pulled him back, the shuffle of slippers on hardwood. At the door stood Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper who had been with the Moores for nearly 20 years. Her eyes widened at seeing him in the forbidden room, but then softened. You finally came back in here, she said quietly. Alexander folded the letter quickly but did not hide it. Tell me the truth, Mrs. Thompson. What has been happening to Lily and Noah? The woman's hands tightened on the cloth she carried. Her lips pressed together as if fighting to keep secrets that had burned her tongue for months. Finally, she sighed. I have seen things. Miss Isabella, she smiles when you're home. But when you travel, she changes. The children fear her. I've found bruises on Lily's wrists. I've heard her threats. I should have told you sooner, but her voice broke. Alexander stood, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You've told me now. That matters. Mrs. Thompson blinked back tears. If you ask me to testify, I will. For the children, I will. The weight of her words struck like iron. This was no longer suspicion, it was confirmation. And it meant war. Later that day, while Isabella napped in the master's suite, Alexander moved quietly through the children's quarters. He opened drawers, checked closets, examined bottles. He jotted notes in a leather-bound journal, formula watered down, blanket to thin. Bruise on left wrist, lock on exterior door. His handwriting pressed into the page with such force the paper tore. In the nursery. He lifted Noah and cradled him against his chest. The boy's tiny fingers clutched his collar, as though refusing to let go. Lily sat nearby, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. Alexander crouched so he was level with her. You don't need to be afraid to tell me, he said softly. Lily tugged her sleeve over her wrist again, as if rehearsed. Then, in a whisper that barely reached his ears, she breathed. She said, if I talk, she'll throw us away. The words sliced him deeper than any betrayal in a boardroom ever could. He pulled both children close, holding them in silence. That night, unable to sleep, Alexander returned once more to Sophia's old room. He sat beneath the portrait she had painted in her 20s, her eyes bright, her smile calm. He whispered to the canvas, I failed, Sophia, but I'll make it right. I promise. The house groaned in the storm outside, branches scraping against the windows like fingers. In the hush of that hour, Alexander understood that the battle for his children's safety had already begun, and the first move was his to make. The storm had passed, but in Rosedale House the air carried a tension that no snowfall could mute. For the first time in years, Alexander canceled every meeting on his calendar. His assistants in the glass tower downtown whispered about their boss's sudden absence, but he didn't care. What mattered was here to small children, in a house that no longer felt like home. On the third evening after his return, Alexander descended the back staircase toward the wine cellar. He meant only to fetch a bottle, something to steady his thoughts. But before he reached the cellar door, voices floated up from below, 2 voices, urgent, hushed. He stopped, breath shallow. If the signature is transferred, a man said, I'll gain control of the Walker Trust. But we need proof. A marriage certificate isn't enough. Alexander's pulse throbbed in his temples. Walker Trust. His family trust bore the Moore name, but the intent was the same, his children's inheritance, their future. He recognized the second voice at once. Don't worry, Isabella replied. her tone colder than he'd ever heard it in daylight. Alexander is busy playing the perfect father now, but he's still a fool. The proxy signature is all I need, and if not, I'll get it another way. The man Caleb, a lawyer Alexander vaguely remembered seeing at one of Isabella's charity galas, shifted. Papers rustled. We can't move without his authorization. No bank in Canada will risk it. Then I'll find a way to make him give it, Isabella snapped. He thinks he's stronger now, but I know where he's weakest. Those children, his precious Lily and Noah. He doesn't realize how easily they can be used. Alexander gripped the banister until his knuckles whitened. Every fiber of his body demanded he storm in, tear the papers from Caleb's hands, expose Isabella right there. But he forced himself to stay in the shadows, silent, absorbing every word. He needed more than anger. He needed evidence that would stand outside this house, in a courtroom, in front of a judge. At last Caleb's shoes clicked against stone, ascending the stairs. Alexander slipped behind a column, unseen. Isabella followed him to the foyer, her laughter polished once again, sending him off like a gracious hostess. When the door closed, silence fell heavy. Alexander remained in the shadows, heart hammering, the words still echoing. Inheritance. Proxy signature. Use the children. He climbed to the nursery with deliberate calm. Lily was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a book open but unread. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wary. Noah stirred in his crib, gurgling softly. Alexander sat on the edge of Lily's bed. "Do you trust me?" he asked. Her lips parted, uncertain. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I need you to be brave for a little longer," he said. "I'm going to protect you, but I need you to tell me whenever something happens, no matter how small. Can you do that?" Lily hesitated, then pushed her sleeve back, revealing the faint bruise on her wrist she had hidden so often. "She doesn't like when I talk too much," she whispered. Alexander's chest burned. He pressed his lips to her forehead. "You're safe with me, Lily. I swear it." That night, he returned to Sophia's old letter, reading the lines until they blurred. "Our home is not safe if their voices are silenced." It was as if she had written it for this very moment. The following morning, he made his first move. He called Richard Collins, an old university friend turned family lawyer. Over coffee in the study, he laid out what he'd heard, the bruises, the locks, the threats. Richard listened without interruption, jotting notes in his careful, tight script. "You have more than enough to pursue an emergency protection order," Richard said at last. "But you'll need to be ready for a fight. She'll deny everything, and she'll play the victim. I don't care how she plays it," Alexander replied, his voice low but firm. "I care about Lily and Noah, and she won't hurt them again." As if to punctuate his vow, the sound of soft footsteps drifted down the hall. Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching Noah's teddy bear. Her gaze flit between the two men, cautious, searching. Alexander extended his hand, palm steady, inviting. She stepped forward and placed her small fingers in his in that fragile gesture. He felt a strength no business empire had ever given him. Isabella might plot, she might scheme, but she had underestimated the bond between a father and his children, and Alexander Moore, once blind in his grief, was now wide awake. The courthouse in Toronto loomed gray and unyielding against a slate sky. Its stone columns seemed carved not only to hold weight, but to judge it. Inside, the marble floors echoed with each step Alexander took, Lily's small hand gripping his tightly, Noah cradled in his other arm. He had walked into hundreds of boardrooms, faced senators, bankers, investors, but never had he felt the weight he carried now. His children's futures balanced on the words spoken here. In the courtroom, the benches filled quickly. Reporters whispered at the back, already hungry for scandal. Millionaire executive in family dispute. Whispers of abuse. Inheritance in question. Alexander ignored them. He had one focus: his daughter's trembling shoulders beside him. At the counsel table, Richard Collins, his friend and lawyer, arranged documents in neat piles. Across from them, Isabella sat with her attorney, Alan Pierce, a man known for his sharp cross-examinations. Isabella's appearance was immaculate: navy skirt suit, pearl earrings, eyes glistening as if tears hovered just out of reach. Two strangers, She looked like the very image of a devoted stepmother. The judge, Eleanor Myers, entered. Her voice was measured but piercing as she called the case. Moore versus Moore. Petition for emergency protection of minors. Richard Rose. Your Honor, the petitioner seeks immediate protection for Lily Moore, age 6, and Noah Moore, 8 months, on grounds of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of their stepmother, Isabella Moore. We will present evidence including witness testimony, photographic documentation, and the children's own accounts. Alan Pierce smirked faintly, rising to reply. Your Honor, my client is the victim of malicious fabrications, motivated by Mr. Moore's grief over his late wife. We intend to show that no abuse occurred, and that these claims are fueled by his desire to erase Isabella's rightful role as their mother. Alexander clenched his fists beneath the table. Isabella lowered her eyes, projecting fragility, as though she were the one on trial. The first witness called was Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper. She stepped to the stand with steady composure. Richard asked her to recount what she had seen. For years I cared for those children, she said, voice firm. I have seen bruises on Lily's wrist. I've heard Isabella threaten her, telling her that if she spoke, she would be thrown out onto the street with her baby brother. I cannot mistake what I saw or heard. Alan rose. Mrs. Thompson, how old are you? 62, in a dark hallway. Could you have misheard? Could your memory be unreliable? Her eyes narrowed. I worked in that house for 10 years. I know the difference between discipline and cruelty. I know what I heard. Alan pressed. Do you bear a personal grudge against my client? None, she answered simply. Only fear for the children. Richard then placed photographs before the judge. Faint bruises on Lily's wrist. Time-stamped just days prior. Judge Myers studied them with a careful frown. Next came the moment Alexander both dreaded and prayed for: Lily's testimony. The bailiff guided her to the stand, her small shoes tapping against the wood. She looked tiny beneath the towering seal of justice, but when she sat, she straightened her back with a courage that broke Alexander's heart. State your name and age. The clerk prompted. My name is Lily Moore, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I'm 6. Judge Myers leaned forward, her tone softening. Lily, you only need to tell the truth. Nothing else. Lily twisted her fingers together. Then she lifted her eyes. If I told my dad, she said she would throw me and Noah out onto the street. Gasps rippled through the room. Alan leapt up. Objection, but before he could finish, Isabella herself exploded. She shot to her feet, finger stabbing toward the witness stand. Liar, you're just like your mother, pretending to be so saintly. Her voice echoed like glass shattering. The courtroom froze. The mask she had worn so carefully cracked in full view. Order. Judge Myers slammed the gavel 3 times. The defendant will sit down immediately. Isabella's laugh was brittle, her shoulders shaking. You think you can take them from me? He never loved me. He only loved her ghost. The judge's eyes hardened. The court notes the defendant's insulting and threatening behavior toward a child in this courtroom. The defendant is held in contempt and remanded to custody for 24 hours. Bailiffs moved swiftly. Isabella's protests dissolved into furious whispers as she was led away. In the silence that followed, Lily's small body trembled. Alexander stood, crossing the room in 3 strides, gathering her into his arms. She clung to him as though she might never let go. Noah stirred against his chest, and in that fragile cluster, father, daughter, son. Alexander felt the gavel's echo like a promise. Judge Myers's final ruling rang steady. An emergency protection order is granted. Custody remains with the petitioner until further proceedings. This court will not gamble with the safety of children. As Alexander left the courtroom, flashes from reporters' cameras burst around him, but he barely noticed. What mattered was the soft grip of Lily's hand in his, the warmth of Noah against his chest, and the knowledge that for the first time in months his children were truly safe. The snow had melted into slush. By the time Alexander drove his children back to Rosedale House, yet the mansion no longer felt like the gilded cage it once was. For the first time in months, the heavy silence inside wasn't laced with fear. Instead, there was the sound of Noah babbling softly from his car seat, and Lily humming a tune she must have picked up at school. They stepped through the front doors together. Alexander set his briefcase aside, not in the office, not under a stack of contracts, but in a corner where it would stay untouched. His hands were full with Noah, and Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "are we safe now?" He knelt so that his eyes met hers. "Yes, sweetheart, safe, and I'm not leaving you again. Not for work, not for anyone." Her lips trembled, then curved into a hesitant smile. She wrapped her arms around his neck with a fierceness far greater than her size. That evening, the house smelled of garlic and tomatoes. Alexander stood at the stove, stirring pasta sauce while Lily rinsed vegetables at the sink. Noah sat in his high chair, banging a spoon against the tray with delighted squeals. The kitchen, once a stage for Isabella's empty performance, now felt alive. Mrs. Thompson entered, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes softening at the sight. "It's good to see the house full again," she said. Alexander turned, gratitude written in the lines of his face. "It's good to feel it again." Over dinner, Lily chattered about school, about how her friend Rosie wanted her to lead the gardening project. Alexander listened intently, nodding, asking questions. He noticed how her voice grew steadier, how her laughter began to ring without hesitation. Later, in the living room, Noah tottered on unsteady legs across the rug, stumbling into Lily's arms. She caught him, both of them tumbling into a heap of giggles. Alexander watched from the armchair, heart swelling. He had closed billion-dollar deals, stood at the peak of his industry, but nothing felt as victorious as this small, ordinary joy before bedtime. He led Lily and Noah to the garden. The late spring air carried the scent of damp earth. Together they planted tomatoes, just as Sophia once had. As they worked, Alexander whispered to the night sky, "Sophia, I kept my promise." That night, with the children tucked safely into his room, Alexander sat in the quiet glow of a lamp. Lily curled beside him, Noah asleep in his crib at the foot of the bed. The house creaked as old houses do, but it no longer sounded menacing. It sounded like history breathing again. He reached for Sophia's letter, still folded in his jacket pocket. Holding it against his chest, he whispered, "We're a family, Sophia. Broken once, but whole again." When he finally lay down, Lily's small hand found his. Her voice, drowsy but certain, slipped into the dark. "I'm glad you stayed, Daddy." Tears stung his eyes. He tightened his grip. So am I. The future would bring court battles, inheritance disputes, and headlines he could not control. But none of that mattered. What mattered was this: the sound of his children breathing evenly in sleep, the warmth of their presence beside him, and the knowledge that he had finally chosen what truly endured. Not wealth, not reputation, but home.